happens next is really, you know, Randy alluded to some of the differences between university press publishers and other publishers, and I would say, you know, really one of the cornerstones of university press publishing is the peer review process, and that's what we're using that manuscript for. I mean, your editor is reading it, but your editor is reading it usually to get an idea. I mean, there may be things that are sort of, I don't know, egregious errors that have somehow slipped your attention. But usually when you submit the manuscript, the editor is engaging with it in an attempt to find out who would be the best people to read this manuscript, to provide feedback on it. And that peer review process is the next stage. And it's also a big part of the kind of it depends aspect of the answer to how long will it take my book to get published, because it does depend. If peer reviews recommend major revisions, this is something that you need to engage with. So basically, just to give you an idea, in general, we try to get, I try to get certainly the peer review process finished in under 3 months. You have to recognize your manuscript. It's a big piece of reading. Somebody has to agree to read it. They have to read it. They have to find constructive and useful things to say about it, and that can take a little bit of time. Finding somebody who has the inclination to take on this particular task at this particular time, also something that can take a little bit of time. But in general, people will be looking to get 2 reports. It's never less than 2. Usually, unless that one report has some really conclusive things to say. Sometimes it's more. If reports disagree, the peer review process may be extended a little bit as you get one more or something like that. But after that peer review process, those reports are returned to you, and that's your opportunity. That the opportunity to sort of engage with those reports in terms of author's response is also an important part of the peer review process, because it constitutes the sort of peer review material that these next stages of approval and Randy mentioned. So after that, the next stage is these publication review committees or publication boards or whatever that are constituted by faculty from each press's parent institution or institutions. And what they're looking at in most cases, or at least in all cases, they may be looking at more, but they're all looking at the reports and the response. And your editor may talk to you about various ways that your response is structured. It's a very particular kind of rhetorical genre, the response, and your editor tries to give you a bunch of guidelines, but they may talk to you about rewriting it in certain kinds of ways, or anyway, certain kinds of things that you've done to engage with the reports in that response. So at that stage, there's on the one hand this publications review committee. Like I said, they're looking at this peer review material. They're making an approval on scholarly grounds. The other stage, in many cases, if your manuscript is eligible and we intend to apply to the Aid to Scholarly Publications program, is an application to the Aid to Scholarly Publications program. That can't happen before that peer review material is there, so this is why all of this stuff kind of happens at the same time after that peer review stage. And the third thing, and this is quite important as well, is that at that point, your manuscript and the sort of eventual book that it will become is kind of conceptually presented to other people at the press. And there's a third kind of internal sort of review and discussion that happens at the press in terms of how many copies of this can we expect to sell, how long a book will these 652 manuscript pages in Times New Roman 12 or whatever, how many book pages will that result in? What is the best thing to do as far as publishing this book? Do you want to publish it in a particular format at a particular price? All of these decisions are being made. What will be the requirements in terms of marketing or production sort of resources at the press in terms of publishing. Essentially, what is the best way to publish this book, and what do we need to do that? So that kind of discussion is happening at the press at the same time, and people are also reading the manuscript and looking at the reports on the manuscript and evaluating certain issues related to that. And I raised that stage because this issue of sort of approval is sometimes not always fully understood. So while the Publications Review Committee, while that is a necessary precondition to publication, it's not a sufficient condition. So you have to, they have to give us the okay to use our McGill Queens or UBC or Wilfrid Laurier Press imprint on the spine of your book, but another criteria is the sort of financial feasibility of the book, and that is one of the things that is being evaluated, or one of the outcomes anyways of the discussion, the internal discussion that happens at the press in terms of resources and stuff like that, as to what it takes for this book to be financially feasible. And I realize I'm taking up a lot of time here.
I just want to clarify one thing, Jonathan. We have the exact same discussion about that, but at our press it's before the Publications Board, so that discussion will take place, and it will depend on the press whether this is before or after the approval.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right. It can. Yeah, that's a good point. It can take place at the same time, before, after. One or the other, but it's important to differentiate those two things, because they're two very separate. Both are ultimately necessary, but each one on its own is they sort of occur. You can sort of think of them separately. So basically, if all of that goes well, you're invited to submit a final manuscript. During one part of that sort of circulation process of your manuscript among people at the press is that a coordinating editor will look at it and say, why don't you have a bibliography? Your notes should come at the end of the chapter. Print your thing double spaced throughout. All sorts of, give you all kinds of kind of formatting and citation stuff that will be helpful and speed up the copy editing process, make it better and easier for the copy editor who's working on your book. And once that happens, the production process starts. So basically, I think most presses have a pretty sort of broad idea about how long it takes. I think what McGill Queens tells its authors is you should expect a year from the time you submit your final manuscript to the time the book is published. And the reason we do that, and it's certainly not hard and fast, and it's another big it depends thing, but that during the production process, the manuscript goes back to the author a lot. So it'll get copy edited. The copy editor will probably talk to you about a lot of stuff maybe during the copy editing process, but you'll get that edited manuscript back, and you'll have to look at it and go through it and say, I don't agree with what you've done here, or this is good or not good or whatever. And you may talk to the coordinating editor as well during that process. But it also goes back, for instance, after the next stage in the production process, which is typesetting. So you get proof. I think usually, in most cases, one of the things that you're doing with proof is compiling an index or arranging for a professional indexer to compile an index. But anyways, there's a certain amount of time that it goes to, and the faster you are turning that manuscript around during those stages, the faster your book will get published. On the time when it's at the press end, we certainly do our best to turn it around, make the production go smoothly and quickly. But you also have to realize that it's back with you a lot. So people don't always, understand that at least half of that time that is in that production schedule, it's because we're waiting for you at various stages. Right. So that's about it. And then, like I say, afterwards, after there's a relationship that you have that starts when your book is cataloged and goes on after publication with people at the marketing department.